Now we talked about predicting performance using references and letters of recommendation. But before we dive in today's discussion, let us first differentiate reference checks, references, and letters of recommendation. So a reference check is the process of confirming the accuracy of information provided by an applicant. A reference, on the other hand, is the expression of an opinion, either orally or through a written checklist regarding an applicant's ability, previous performance, work habits, character, or potential for future success. The content and format of a reference are determined by the person or organization asking for the reference. And lastly, a letter of recommendation is a letter expressing an opinion regarding an applicant's ability, previous performance, work habits, character, or potential for future success. Now, contrary to the reference, the content and format of a letter of recommendation are determined by the letter writer and not by the person or organization asking for the reference. Now let us proceed to the reasons for using references and recommendation. First is to confirm details on a resume. One reason to check references or ask for letters of recommendation is simply to confirm the truthfulness of information provided by the applicant. Now, to realize the significance of this step in the recruitment and selection process, let us look at the numbers. So, in a survey of employers in the United Kingdom, 25% said that they had withdrawn job offers in the past year after discovering that applicants had lied on their applications. And another 23% said they had fired current employees after discovering resume fraud. These are big numbers that we need to look at. Now, second is to check for discipline problems. Second reason to check references or obtain letters of recommendation is to determine whether the applicant has a history of such discipline problems, such as poor attendance, sexual harassment, and violence. These details are important for an organization to discover in order to avoid future problems as well as to protect itself from a potential charge of negligent hiring. Now, you might ask, what is negligent hiring? Negligent hiring cases are typically filed in court as a common law cases or torts. These cases are based on the premise that an employer has the duty to protect its employees and customers from harm caused by its employees or products. And third is to discover new information about the applicant. References and letters of recommendation certainly can be two methods of understanding the personality and skill of job applicants. We can use former employers and professors to provide information about an applicant's work habits, character, personality, and skills. But care must be taken when using these methods because the opinion provided by any particular reference may be inaccurate or may be purposefully untrue. Thus, reference checkers should always obtain specific behavioral examples and try to get consensus from several references. These are things that we have to note when we become recruiters ourselves in the future. Now, a relatively recent trend also in reference checking is for employers to Google an applicant's name to provide more information about the applicant. Now, this is something that's not new to us. We have heard about it and we have cleaned up our timelines. Now, fourth is predicting future performance. References and letters of recommendation are ways to try to predict future performance by looking at previous or past performance. However, although references are commonly used to screen and select employees, they have actually not been successful in predicting future employee success. Having discussed all those reasons on why we should use references and letters of recommendations, are you now excited to craft your own letter of recommendation? Please chat a yes or a no or maybe in the chat. But before we write our letter of recommendation, let us first know what should we do when writing a letter of recommendation. So first is to explicitly state our relationship with the person that we are recommending. This is important because people often have dual roles in the person's life. Now, a person may be a supervisor as well as a good friend. Now, without understanding the exact nature of the referee and referent relationship, making judgment about the content of a reference can be difficult. And second, we have to be honest in providing the details. A referee has both an ethical and a legal obligation to provide relevant information about an applicant. A good rule of thumb is to ask, if I were in the reference seeker's shoes, what would I need to know? And finally, let the applicant see your reference before sending it and give him the chance to decline to use it. Such a procedure is fair to the applicant and reduces the referee's liability for any defamation charges. Now moving on to predicting performance using applicant training and education. Now for many jobs, it is common for applicants to have a minimum level of education or training to be considered. That is, an organization might require that managerial applicants have a bachelor's degree to pass the initial applicant screening process. Though degree requirements may seem logical, the research literature surrounding this topic has found inconsistent results regarding their validity. However, a collective number of meta-analyses also indicate that a student's GPA can predict job performance, training performance, promotions, salary, and graduate school performance. Now let us move forward to predicting performance using applicant knowledge. Used primarily in the public sector, especially for promotions, job knowledge tests are designed to measure how much a person knows about a job. In our setting as college students, job knowledge test is similar to the exams given to us several times in a semester, or what we call prelim, midterm, and final exams. These exams are typically in a multiple choice fashion for ease of scoring, but they can also be written in essay format or given orally in a job interview. And even though knowledge tests do a good job of predicting performance, they often result in adverse impact and can be used only for jobs in which applicants are expected to have job knowledge at the time of hire or promotion. Common examples of job knowledge tests include tests of computer programming knowledge, knowledge of electronics, and knowledge of mechanical principles.
When it comes to predicting performance using applicant ability, it is the best way to examine the performances of the applicants using the different kinds of ability tests. The ability tests are good predictors of performance, since this will help provide a valuable insight into the candidate's ability to process information, working within a time limit, and can also provide a well-rounded picture of an individual in the workplace. One kind of ability test is cognitive ability, wherein it allows individual to demonstrate what they know, perceive, remember, understand, or assess the abilities involved with thinking. Cognitive ability is important for professionals like supervisors, accountants, secretary, engineer, and etc. But the question is why? Through cognitive ability tests, you can hire the best in which can help lead the future success of the company. And there are two ways that predict work performance, which is through letting employees learn faster in a job-related knowledge and processing information that can result to a better decision making. One of the examples of cognitive ability test is the Wonder Lake Personnel Test, where it is considered as a speed test with a brief format of 50 questions that involve mathematical, verbal, logical, and analogical reasoning skills that only takes about 12 minutes. Perceptual ability consists of vision, color discrimination, depth perception, glare sensitivity, speech, and hearing. In psychomotor ability, the physical function of movement associated with coordination, dexterity, reaction time is also called motor or sensory motor abilities. It may be a complex task which individual is required to move arms and legs in coordination, as in flying an airplane, driving a vehicle, or playing an organ. Or it may be a simple or discrete action such as firing a weapon, pulling the lever, or administering an injection to a patient. Psychomotor abilities are useful for such jobs as carpenter, police officer, sewing machine operator, post office clerk, and even the truck drivers. When it comes to physical agility tests, instead of simulating defensive behaviors, tests are developed that measures the basic abilities needed to perform these behaviors. The 9 basic physical abilities have advantages and disadvantages. The advantages is that it can help identify individuals who are physically unable to perform the essential functions of a job without risking injury to themselves or the others. It can result in a decreased cost related to the disability or medical claims, insurance, workers' compensation, and decreased absenteeism. While on the other hand, its disadvantages is that it may be costly to administer, and the requirements must be shown to job related through job analysis, and this may have an age bias disparate impact against older applicants. Job relatedness measures a trait or skill that is job related and consistent with business necessity. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission provides guidelines that prohibit discrimination against protected groups including sex, race, age, disability, national origin, and more. The passing scores are set based on two types of standards, relative and absolute. Relative standards indicate how well an individual scores compared with others in a group such as women, police applicants, or concurrent police officers. The advantage to using relative standards is that the adverse impact is eliminated because men are compared with men and women with women. In contrast, absolute passing scores are set at the minimum level needed to perform a job. When the ability must be present, there is a need to provide applicants with a list of physical abilities that will be required of them once they arrive at the academy. Predicting performance using applicant skill. When it comes to work sample, these are hands-on performance tests or simulations of job, which are used to estimate concurrent or predict future performance on similar tasks. Work sample is an excellent selection tool because they directly related to job tasks. They have excellent content validity and the scores from the work samples tend to predict actual work performance and thus have excellent criterion validity. In leaderless group discussion, the applicants are formed into small groups and are asked to solve a job-related problems and issue. For example, supervisory applicants might be asked to discuss ways to motivate employees or employee selection. As the applicants discuss the problem or issue, they individually rated on such dimensions as cooperativeness, leadership, and analytical skills. Business games is an executive training in which individuals or teams compete against one another in solving typical but simulated management, financial, or operational problems and demonstrate attributes as creativity, decision making, and ability to work with others. The assessment center activities must be based on the results of a thorough job analysis. Multiple assessment technique must be used, at least one of which must be a simulation. The behavioral observation must be documented at the time the applicant behavior is observed. The overall judgment of the applicant must be based on the combination of information from the multiple assessors and multiple techniques. The overall evaluation of an applicant cannot be made until all assessment center tasks have been completed. The in-basket technique is a way of acquainting workers with their jobs by holding a variety of issues in an in-basket. The worker must assess the issue, which would include feedback from other workers and interact with them all at the same time. Simulations, which can include such diverse activities as role plays and work samples, place an applicant in a situation that is as similar as possible to one that will be encountered on the job. To be effective, simulations must be based on job related behaviors and should be reasonably realistic.
Now let's move on onto how we can predict employees or applicants' performance using their prior experience. So, a meta-analysis conducted and has found that there is a significant relationship between experience and future job performance. But we should not depend on this too much and put the following into consideration in giving credit of the applicant's experience. So, the following are the amount of experience. So, how long was your working tenure? What was their level of performance that was demonstrated in their previous jobs? Was it above average or not? Of course, we should look at the relatedness of their experience to the job they're aiming for or applying for. So, a teacher applying to be a call center agent seems plausible because in teaching, you are trained to speak articulately. So, an excellent communication skill is expected of the applicant. If the teacher does not exhibit great communication skills despite their long years of teaching, it's most probable that someone else might get hired instead of him or her. In applying for a job, applicants submit their biodata for review, and this biodata will serve as a tool to assess the applicant's life, education, and work experience. So, research suggests that biodata is a good predictor of job performance and best predictor of future employee tenure. The file approach and the questionnaire approach are the two ways in obtaining employees' information. The file approach is used when we obtain information from personal files on employees' previous employments education, interest, and demographics. Its difference from the questionnaire approach is that the latter's approach consists of questions that will be distributed or administered to applicants and employees. Despite its good job in predicting future employee behavior, biodata also has its criticisms, and these are listed above. Now, what we are going to discuss here is how to resolve these criticisms. So, first, we should be able to utilize a large sample for it to yield consistent results over time. Second is that items used in the biodata must deal with events under a person's control, must be job-related, verifiable, and shall not invade an applicant's privacy. And third is that we could also use bogus items to catch on those people who fake their answers in the biodata. So other than the use of prior experiences, performance could also be predicted using personality, interest, and character. So the use of personality inventories as an employee selection method was due to its ability to predict performance and because they result in less adverse impact on minorities. So personality inventories fall into two categories: the test of normal personality and the test of psychopathology. So the test of normal personality is designed to reveal one's personality traits such as extraversion, conscientiousness, openness, and etc. So the test of psychopathology, on the other hand, determines whether one has serious psychological problems. The determination of the number and type of personality dimensions measured by an inventory can usually be based on a theory. It could also be statistically based and empirically based. The number of dimensions in a theory-based test is identical to the number postulated by a well-known theory. So for example, the Myers-Briggs type indicator is based on Carl Jung's analytical theory, and the number of dimensions in a statistically based test is determined through a statistical process called factor analysis. The most well-known of this type is the 16PF, or personality factor, that was created by Raymond Cattell, and as its name implies, it contains 16 dimensions. So the number and the location of dimensions under which items fall in empirically based tests is determined by grouping answers given by people known to possess a certain characteristic. So it would depend on the culture or the place. As mentioned, the test of psychopathology is to determine whether an individual has a serious psychological problem. This is frequently used in the selection of law enforcement officers, as this is considered to be part of their medical exam. So it is scored in two ways, through objective way and projective way. So projective tests provide the respondent with unstructured tasks such as describing ink blots and drawing pictures. Objective tests are structured so that the respondent is limited to a few answers that will be scored by standardized keys. So an example of this would be personality assessment inventory. So interest inventories, from the name itself, tap on vocational interests such as bargaining, repairing, electrical wiring, and taking responsibility. The theory behind this is that an individual with interests similar to those of people in a particular field will be more likely satisfied in that than in a field of people whose interests are different from theirs. Next, we have the integrity test. The integrity test tells an employer the probability that an applicant would steal money or merchandise. So there are legal issues surrounding the use of polygraph and voice stress analyzer for the determination of such employees. However, paper and pencil integrity tests were allowed by the court. So we have overt integrity tests that are based on the premise that a person's attitudes about theft as well as his previous theft behavior will accurately predict his future honesty. We also have personality-based integrity tests, which are more general in that they tap a variety of personal traits thought to be related to a wide range of counterproductive behaviors such as theft, absenteeism, and violence. So to avoid inaccurate responses, conditional reasoning tests were developed. In these tests, they are asked to justify their answers. From their answers, we're able to indicate their aggressive biases or beliefs. It was also believed that these tests are more difficult to fake than integrity tests. Graphology is the last item in this category. The use of graphology or analyzing one's handwriting is to indicate one's work performance. It is believed that somehow one's handwriting could reveal their personality, which in turn should indicate their work performance. So the size, the slant, the width, the regularity and pressure is analyzed in this writing sample. From this, the temperament and mental, social, work, and moral traits of a person are revealed. However, research has shown that graphology is not a useful technique in employee selection.
So let us now move on to predicting performance limitations due to medical and psychological problems. In Chapter 3, the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA, limits the consideration of medical and psychological problems to those that keeps the employee from performing essential job functions. So in this industry, the human resource professionals uses different testing methods to ensure psychologically and physically healthy employees to secure their jobs. So in this juncture, I will enumerate and explain each testing methods one by one. So the first testing method is drug testing. We all know that this type of testing is conducted in different companies all around the globe and is famous in ensuring the employees' healthy productivity in the workplace. Drug testing is one of the most controversial testing method used by human resource professionals. According to research, the reason for this high usage of testing method is that 8.2% of employees admit in using drugs. And human resource professionals believe that this illegal drug use is not only dangerous, but research also seen that many employees are under the influence of drugs while at work. Their research also indicates that compared with non-drug users, illegal drug users are more likely to miss work, 16 times as likely to use healthcare benefits, and have 3.6 times as many accidents on the job. Testing of employees usually takes one of three forms. The first one is all employees or randomly selected employees are tested at predetermined times, meaning that all employees or randomly selected employees are being tested during a scheduled date for a drug testing. Second, all employees or randomly selected employees are tested at random times. That is, employees are being tested randomly without an advance notice or they are not being prepared for a drug testing schedule. Third one, employees who have been involved in an accident or disciplinary action are tested following the incident. The second form is probably the most effective in terms of punishing or preventing drug usage. So let's move on to the second testing method, which is psychological exams. Psychological exam usually consists of an interview by a clinical psychologist, an examination of the applicant's life history, and the administration of one or more psychological tests. In jobs involving public safety such as law enforcement, nuclear power, transportation, or etc., it is common for an employer to give psychological tests or exams to an applicant after a conditional offer of hire has been made. If an applicant fails the exam, the offer is revoked. It is important to keep in mind that psychological exams are not designed to predict employee performance or productivity. The last testing method is medical exams. In job requiring physical exertion, many employers require that a medical exam be taken after a conditional offer of hire has been made. In these exams, the physician is given a copy of the job description and asked to determine if there are any medical conditions that will keep the employee from safely performing the job. In all techniques being presented, a question pops in our mind. Which method of selecting employees is the best? As what shows in the validity of selection techniques, unstructured interview, education, interest inventories, and some personality traits are not good predictors of future employee performance for most jobs. It is also clear that ability, work samples, biodata, and structured interviews do a fairly good job in predicting future employee performance. After discussing about the different testing methods and the validity of techniques used in hiring of employees, let us now tackle onto how to properly reject applicants. Rejected applicants should be treated well because they are potential customers and potential applicants for other positions that might available in the organization. In fact, Ammon and Pagans in 1988 found that applicants who were rejected properly were more likely to continue to be a customer at the organization and to apply for future job openings. Once a decision has been made regarding which applicants will be hired, those who will not be hired must be notified. Notifying applicants may receive rejection letter. Though research has not clearly identified the best way in writing rejection letter, the following guidelines are probably a good place to start. First, send rejection letters to applicants. Second, don't send the rejection letter immediately. Wong and Bryce suggest that applicants react more positively if there is a delay in receiving the rejection letter. Third, be as personable and as specific as possible in the letter. With the use of automated applicant tracking system, it is fairly easy to individually address each letter. Express the company's appreciation for applying, and perhaps explain who was hired and what their qualifications were. In general, friendly letters result in better applicants' attitudes. Fourth, including a statement about the individual who received the job can increase applicant satisfaction with both the selection process and the organization. Fifth, do not include the name of a contact person. Surprisingly, research has shown that including such a contact decreases the probability that a person will reapply for future jobs. The most important thing to consider when writing a letter of rejection is to be honest. Do not tell the applicants that their resumes will be kept on file for each job opening will not be used.
So in Chapter 5, we all learned about the ways in which to recruit and select employees. In this chapter, Chapter 6, we will be tackling or we'll be learning how to evaluate whether a particular selection method is useful and how to use test scores to make a hiring decision. And to do that, we must know what are the characteristics of effective selection techniques. The effective selection techniques have 4 characteristics. They are reliable, valid, cost-efficient, and legally defensible. So let's first talk about reliability. So reliability is the extent to which a score from a selection measure is stable and free from error. So test reliability is determined in 4 ways. First, test-retest reliability. So test-retest reliability is a specific way to measure reliability of a test, and it refers to the extent that a test produces similar results over time. For example, we may give an IQ test to 60 participants on March 1 or March 1st and then give the same type of IQ test of similar difficulty to the same group of 60 participants 1 month later. From there, we could calculate the correlation of scores between the 2 sets to determine if the test has good test-retest reliability. We have alternate forms reliability. This is the consistency of results among 2 or more different forms of a test. If you wanted to evaluate the reliability of critical thinking assessment, for example, so 2 forms of the same test are constructed. Let's say you have 2 sets, Form A and Form B, and then a sample of 100 people. So half of the sample first receive Form A, and the other half of the sample receive Form B. This is the counterbalancing of test-taking order. So the scores on the 2 forms are then correlated to determine whether they are similar. So if they are, the test is said to have form stability. A third way to determine the reliability of a test or inventory is to look at the consistency with which an applicant responds to items measuring a similar dimension or construct. So the extent to which similar items are answered in similar ways is referred to as internal consistency and measures item stability. So for example, a group of respondents are presented with a set of statements designed to measure optimistic and pessimistic mindsets. So they must rate their agreement with each statement on scale from 1 to 5. If the test is internally consistent, an optimistic respondent should generally give high ratings to optimism indicators and low ratings to pessimism indicators. Now let's move on sa scorer reliability. So it refers to the consistency with which different people who score the same test agree. So when human judgment of performance is involved, scorer reliability is discussed in terms of inter-rater reliability. That is, will 2 interviewers give an applicant similar ratings, or will 2 supervisors give an employee similar performance ratings? It is the degree to which inferences from scores on tests or assessments are justified by the evidence. And there are 5 common strategies to investigate the validity of scores on a test. Let's start with content validity. So when a test has content validity, the items on the test represent the entire range of possible items the test should cover. Next, we have criterion validity. It refers to the extent to which a test score is related to some measure of job performance called a criterion. And criterion validity is established using one of two research design: concurrent validity design and predictive validity design. Concurrent validity design is a test that is given to a group of employees who are already on the job. So the scores on the test are then correlated with measure of the employee's current performance. While predictive validity design is a test administered to a group of job applicants who are going to be hired. So the test scores are then compared with a future measure of job performance. Construct validity. So a test has construct validity if it demonstrates an association between the test scores and the prediction of a theoretical trait. So intelligence tests are one example of measurement instruments that should have construct validity. A valid intelligence test should be able to accurately measure the construct of intelligence rather than other characteristics such as memory or education level. Another method of measuring construct validity is the known group validity. So known group's validity is demonstrated when a test or questionnaire can discriminate between two groups known to differ on the variable of interest. Face validity. So it is the extent to which a test appears to be job-related. Face validity considers how suitable the content of a test seems to be on the surface. It's similar to content validity, but the face validity is more informal and subjective. As face validity is a subjective measure, it's often considered the weakest form of validity.
Cost efficiency. So if two tests have equivalent validities, then cost should be considered. Choose the cheaper and easier to administer test without compromising validity and reliability. So for it to be cost efficient, we should consider the cost to purchase or create, the cost to administer, and cost to score. For legal defensibility, it should reduce the chance of legal challenge. So the instrument or the selection technique don't intentionally discriminate and minimize adverse impact. That's it for my part. Now let's listen to Ms. Abdal's report.
Establishing the usefulness of a selection device. The fact remains that even when a test is both valid and reliable, it is not necessarily useful. For example, is a new test versus an old test. Both are valid, but the old test may have worked so well that the current employees are all successful. Therefore, a new test may not be necessary. This being a case of example, several formulas and tables have been designed to determine how useful a test would be at any given situation.
The Taylor-Russell tables. This table is designed to estimate the percentage of total new hires who will be successful employees if an organization uses a particular test. To use the table, three information are needed. One is the test criterion validity coefficient, which includes two ways to achieve coefficient. It is to either conduct a criterion validity study with test scores correlated with some measure of job performance, or use validity generalization on the basis of research findings.
The higher the validity coefficient, the greater the possibility the test will be useful. The second information to be obtained is the selection ratio, which is the percentage of people an organization must hire. The ratio is determined by the formula selection ratio equals the number hired divided by the number of applications. Here, the lower the selection ratio, the greater the potential usefulness of the test. Third and final information is the base rate of the current performance, which is the percentage of employees currently on the job who are considered successful. So how do we obtain this? The first method is to split employees into two equal groups based on their score on a criterion such as their performance. The base rate using this method is always 0.50 because half of the employees are already considered satisfactory. The second method is to choose a criterion measure score above which all employees are considered successful, separating them from the unsuccessful ones. Portion of correct decisions. Compared to Taylor-Russell tables, portion of correct decisions is easier but less accurate. We will only use the information of the employee test scores and the scores on the criterion. In Figure 1, lines are drawn from the point on the y-axis, or the criterion score, that represents a successful applicant, and from the point on the x-axis that represents the lowest score of a hired applicant. As you can see, these lines divide the scores into 4 quadrants illustrated in Figure 2. The points located in Quadrant 1 represent employees who scored poorly on the test but performed well on the job. Points located in Quadrant 2 represent employees who scored well on the test and were successful on the job. Points in Quadrant 3 represent employees who scored high on the test yet did poorly on the job. And points in Quadrant 4 represent employees who scored low on the test and did poorly on the job. If a test is a good predictor of performance, there should be more points in Quadrant 2 and 4 because in Quadrants 1 and 3, no correspondence is seen between test scores and criterion scores. To estimate the test's effectiveness, the number of points in each quadrant is totaled, and the following formula is used. Points in Quadrants 2 and 4 divided by the total points in all the quadrants. The resulting number represents the percentage of time that we expect to be accurate in making a selection decision in the future. To determine whether this is an improvement, we use the following formula. Points in Quadrants 1 and 2 divided by the total points in all the quadrants. If the percentage from the first formula is higher than that from the second, our proposed test should increase selection accuracy. If not, it is probably better to stick with the selection method currently used. Lossy tables. This table determines the probability that a particular applicant will be successful. To use the table, 3 information are needed: the validity coefficient, the base rate, which both are found the same way as the Taylor-Russell tables, and the third information is the applicant test score. Rowden-Cronbach-Gleiser utility formula. This is used to compute the amount of money an organization would save if it used the test to select employees. To use this, 5 information is obtained. 1. Number of employees hired per year. 2. Average tenure. 3. Test validity. 4. Standard deviation of performance in dollars. And 5. Mean standardized predictor score of selected applicants.
The mean standardized predictor score is determined by either 1. Obtaining the average score of the selection test for both the applicants who are hired and the applicants who are not hired. The formula would be the average test score of the non-hired applicants is subtracted from the average test score of the hired applicants. This difference is divided by the standard deviation of all test scores.
Hi, so in my part, I'm gonna discuss determining the fairness of a test, and in this part, I'm gonna go through how we assure the fairness of a test and what are the things we have to consider to assure the fairness of a test. And a test has to ensure that the test is fair and unbiased. And when you say fair and unbiased, they're similar terms, but it's slightly different meaning. And bias refers to technical aspects of a test, and a test is considered biased if there are group differences in test scores that are irrelevant to the construct being measured. And when you say group differences, it refers to gender, age, or races. And second one is fairness. It includes bias also and political and social issues. And a test is considered fair if people have an equal chance to be hired. So in other words, post-IO psychologists agree that a test is fair if it can predict performance equally well for races, genders, and other national origins. So next one is adverse impact. This is a part we have to consider when we have a selection process, and adverse impact occurs if the selection rate of for any group is less than 80% of the highest scoring group, and the difference is statistically significant. So in other words, we have to keep the 80% rule. And when you determine the adverse impact, first we have to look at test results, and second is anticipating adverse effects prior to the test. And to determine this, we can simply compare the hiring rates of two groups, which means hires is divided by applicants. So now, when you say the applicants, we have a basic qualification for applicants, and first, it must be needed to perform the job, and second, it must be formally identified and communicated prior to the start of the selection process, and third, it must be consistently applied. And these are criteria that we have to ensure as a participant, as a applicant. So to ensure the fairness, we have two validities that we have to consider. First is single group validity, and second is differential validity. And single validity, the test will significantly predict performance for one group and not others. So the point is, it is only predicting the one group only. And when the single group validity occurs, there are three options that we can take. First, it can disregard single group validity because research indicates that it probably occurred by chance. Second, it can stop using it as a test. And third, it can use a test for only the one group and find another test to use for other groups. And first one, it can disregard single group validity, is appropriate from the options. And next one is differential validity, and this one is a test is valid for both of groups, two groups, but more valid for one than for the others. And single group validity and differential validity are quite similar terms, and when you say single group validity, as I mentioned, this is only determining one group. However, differential validity is valid for both of groups. However, it is more valid for one than the others. And if differential validity occurred, you can take two options. First, not to use that test. Second is to use that test with separate regression equation for each groups. And preferably second option is better to take. And lastly, to summarize all the steps that we have to consider to ensure the fairness, we have three fairness hurdles. First, a test does not lead to an adverse impact, and second, does not have single group validity, which means it predicts only one group, and lastly, does not have differential validity, which means it predicts it is valid for both of groups, but it is more valid one than the others.
Let's now discuss making the hiring decision. After valid and fair selection tests have been administered to a group of applicants, a final decision must be made as to which applicant or applicants to hire. At first, this may seem to be an easy decision, hiring the applicants with the highest test scores. But the decision becomes more complicated as both the number and variety of tests increase. If there are more than criterion valid tests is used, the scores on the test must be combined. In this manner, multiple regression is used wherein each test score is weighted according to how well it predicts the criterion. So, linear approaches to hiring usually take one or four forms, which includes unadjusted top-down selection, rules of three, passing scores, or banding. Now let's talk about these four forms one by one. So now let's talk about unadjusted top-down selection. So this type of linear approach comprises of two approaches, top-down selection and compensatory approach. So let's talk about the top-down selection. So it is wherein applicants are ranked ordered on the basis of their test scores. So basically the selection is made by starting with the highest score down to the lowest until all openings have been filled. So an example of which is that the applicants of the company, their overall score are ranked in order from highest to lowest, and only the candidates with the highest scores are offered the employment in that certain company. So according to Smith, 1999, the advantage of top-down selection is that by hiring the top scorers on the valid test, an organization will benefit the most utility. However, there's also a cons of the or con rather of this type of selection. It is that it will result to high adverse impact and reduces the flexibility of organization when it is utilized by the company. So now let's proceed to the compensatory approach. So it is an approach wherein the assumption is that if multiple test scores are used, the relationship between a low score on one test can compensated for by a high score on another. For an example of compensatory approach is that a student applying to a graduate school might have a low GRE score but have high undergraduate grade point average or GPA. If the GPA is high enough, it would compensate for the low GRE score. So now let's talk about the rules of three. So this technique often used in the public sector wherein rule of three or rule of five, in which the names of the top three or five scorers are given to the person making the hiring decision. So basically, they will choose from those three top scorers, and from that, they will choose who will get the job offer or the employment of the organization. So now let's discuss passing scores. So passing scores are a means of reducing adverse impact and increased flexibility of an organization. With this system, an organization determines the lowest score on the test that is associated with acceptable performance on the job. For example, we know that a student scoring 1,300 on the SAT will probably have better grades in college than a student scoring 800. But what is the lowest score on the SAT that we can accept and still be confident that the student will be able to pass classes and graduate? Notice the distinct difference between top-down selection and passing scores. With top-down selection, the question is who will perform the best in the future. But with passing scores, the question becomes who will be able to perform at an acceptable level in the future. So this technique comprises of two approaches. So first, let's talk about the multiple cutoff approach, wherein the applicants would be administered in all of the tests at one time. If they failed any of the tests below the passing score, they would not be considered further for the employment. So next approach will be multiple hurdle approach, wherein it is used to reduce the cost associated with applicants failing one or more tests. With a multiple hurdle approach, the applicant is administered one test at a time, usually beginning with the least expensive, and then applicants who fail a test are eliminated from further consideration and take no more tests. Applicants who pass all the tests are then administered the linearly related tests. Then the applicants with the top scores on each test are hired. So guys, we're now down to the last technique of making hiring decision. So as mentioned previously, a problem with top-down hiring is that the process results in the highest levels of adverse impact. On the other hand, use of passing scores decreases adverse impact but reduces utility. As a compromise between top-down hiring and passing scores, banding attempts to hire the top test scorers while still allowing some flexibility for affirmative action. So the concept of banding is based on the idea that small differences between test scores may not translate into meaningful differences in expected job performance. For example, a candidate who scores 94% on a test may not perform noticeably better on the job than a candidate who scores 92%. So that's it for making the hiring decisions. So making the right hiring decision doesn't only mean that you found the best person for the job. It also means that this individual also thinks they've found the best role for them. It's imperative you make it clear throughout the entire hiring process what your expectations for the candidate or candidates are. Thank you.